Imagine being told by your own government that you have to fight in a battle, but not to win territory, not to defend your home, and not even to kill your enemy outright. No, you're fighting so that you can be captured alive, dragged up the steps of a massive pyramid, and have your still beating heart ripped out of your chest while thousands of people watch and cheer. And here's the really messed up part. Both sides agreed to this. Welcome to the Flower Wars, the Aztec Empire's real-life version of the Hunger Games. Except Suzanne Collins could never have dreamed up something this brutal, this calculated, or this terrifyingly effective. Because when you actually dig into how the Aztec Empire ran its system of ritual warfare, you realize that Panem, the capital, President Snow, all of it, that's amateur hour compared to what was happening in central Mexico hundreds of years before Europeans ever showed up. So buckle up, because today we're going deep into one of the most disturbing and fascinating military systems in all of human history. So let's start with the basics. What exactly were the Flower Wars? In the Nahuatl language, they were called Xochiaoyotl, which literally translates to flowery war or war of flowers. And no, that's not some poetic euphemism. The Aztecs associated flowers with blood and sacrifice. To them, warriors who fell in battle or were sacrificed were like beautiful blossoms being offered to the gods. Pretty metal, right? The Flower Wars were a specific type of prearranged battle between the Aztec Triple Alliance, that's the empire centered around Tenochtitlan, and certain enemy city-states, most notably Tlaxcala, Huejotzingo, and Cholula. These weren't spontaneous clashes, they were scheduled. Negotiated, both sides would agree on a time, a place, and essentially the rules of engagement, and the primary goal was not to kill your opponent on the battlefield, but to capture them alive. Why? Because the Aztec Empire had an absolutely insatiable need for human sacrificial victims. Their cosmology demanded it. They believed that the sun god Huitzilopochtli needed to be fed with human blood and human hearts to keep rising every single morning. Without those sacrifices, the world would literally end. Darkness would consume everything. So in the Aztec mind, these wars weren't cruelty for cruelty's sake. They were cosmic maintenance. They were keeping the universe running. But here's where it starts to feel eerily like a dystopian novel. The Flower Wars weren't just about religion. They were a brilliantly cynical tool of political control, military training, and imperial intimidation. And that's where the Hunger Games comparison gets really interesting. In the Hunger Games, the capital uses the games to remind the districts who's in charge. Every year, children are reaped, forced to fight, and the whole spectacle is broadcast as entertainment and as a warning. Submit, or this happens to you. The Aztec Flower Wars operated on almost the exact same logic, just without the cameras. See, the Aztec Empire was not a monolithic state that directly controlled every city under its influence. It was more like a tribute empire. Conquered peoples paid taxes in goods, labor, and yes, human beings. But some city-states were never fully conquered, and that was by design. Tlaxcala is the perfect example. The Aztecs could have crushed Tlaxcala. They had the numbers and the military strength. But instead, they kept Tlaxcala independent and surrounded, essentially turning it into a farm for sacrificial captives and a permanent training ground for Aztec warriors. Think about that for a second. They deliberately preserved an enemy so they could keep harvesting warriors from it. That is cold, calculated statecraft. The Flower Wars kept the Aztec military sharp without the cost of full-scale conquest campaigns. They provided a constant stream of sacrificial victims for the temples. They gave young warriors a way to prove themselves and climb the social ladder, because in Aztec society, your rank was directly tied to how many captives you had taken in battle. And perhaps most importantly, they sent a message to every other city-state in Mesoamerica. Look at what we do to people. Look at the scale of our sacrifices. Do you really want to resist us? The mass sacrifices that resulted from Flower Wars were public spectacles. Thousands of captives would be marched up the steps of the Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan, and one by one, priests would cut open their chests with obsidian blades and tear out their hearts. Some historical accounts claim that during the rededication of the Templo Mayor in 1487, as many as 20,000 people were sacrificed over the course of 4 days. Now, modern historians debate that exact number, and it was likely exaggerated, but even conservative estimates put it in the thousands. Thousands. In 4 days. Let that sink in. Now here's the part that makes this even more complex and honestly more disturbing than any fictional dystopia. The warriors who fought in these flower wars often went willingly, eagerly even. In Aztec society, there was no greater honor than to capture enemies in battle, and no more glorious death than to be sacrificed to the gods. Warriors who captured 4 or more enemies in battle earned the right to join elite military orders like the Jaguar warriors or the Eagle warriors. These were the rock stars of Aztec civilization. They got special clothing, special privileges, land, and political influence. Taking captives in flower wars was literally the only way for a commoner to rise above his social station. And if you were captured yourself, well, that was still considered honorable. You were becoming food for the gods. You were sustaining the cosmos. Aztec poetry and philosophy are filled with references to the beauty of dying in battle or on the sacrificial stone. They called it a flowery death, and it was considered the highest possible fate for a warrior. So unlike the Hunger Games, where tributes are terrified and unwilling, many Aztec warriors walked into flower wars with genuine religious conviction that what they were doing mattered on a cosmic scale. That's not less terrifying. That's more terrifying. Because it means the system didn't just rely on fear, it relied on belief. The empire had convinced people that the machine that was grinding them up was actually sacred. And if you were on the other side, if you were Tlaxcalan, you were trapped. You couldn't leave. The Aztecs had economically blockaded your city. You couldn't trade for salt, cotton, or cacao. You were surrounded, impoverished, and forced into these ritual battles that slowly bled your population dry while making Aztec warriors stronger and more experienced. Sound familiar? Because that's basically District 12. Every good dystopia has a rebellion, right? Katniss Everdeen lights the spark, and the whole system burns. Well, the Aztec flower wars had their own Katniss moment, and his name was Hernán Cortés. When the Spanish arrived in 1519, they didn't conquer the Aztec Empire alone. That's one of the biggest misconceptions in history. Cortés had a few hundred Spaniards, some horses, and some guns. What he really had was something far more powerful. He had allies, and guess who was first in line to join him? Tlaxcala. The Tlaxcalans had been suffering under the flower war system for generations. They were exhausted, depleted, and absolutely furious. When Cortés showed up and said he wanted to march on Tenochtitlan, the Tlaxcalans basically said, "We've been waiting for this moment our entire lives." They provided tens of thousands of warriors who fought alongside the Spanish in the siege of Tenochtitlan. The very system the Aztecs had designed to keep their enemies weak and terrified ended up creating the coalition that destroyed them. The flower wars had generated so much resentment, so much hatred among subject peoples and targeted city-states, that when an alternative appeared, even one as strange and foreign as a group of bearded men on horses, they took it without hesitation. The Aztec Empire fell in 1521, and the flower wars died with it. But the irony is almost poetic. The Aztecs built a machine that ran on controlled violence and fear, and that machine created the exact conditions for its own destruction. If that's not the plot of a dystopian novel, I don't know what is. Now, I want to be clear about something. Comparing the Aztec Empire to a fictional dystopia is a useful way to understand the dynamics at play, but we have to be careful. The Aztecs were a real civilization with incredible achievements in engineering, astronomy, agriculture, art, and philosophy. Tenochtitlan was one of the largest and most sophisticated cities in the world when the Spanish first saw it. They had floating gardens, aqueducts, massive marketplaces, compulsory education for all children, and a legal system that in some ways was more progressive than what existed in Europe at the time. Reducing them to just the sacrifice people is lazy and colonial. The flower wars were one part of an incredibly complex civilization, and they need to be understood in context. But that context doesn't make them less horrifying. It makes them more so, because it shows that a society can be brilliant and beautiful and still build systems of extraordinary cruelty. And honestly, that's the real lesson of the Hunger Games too, isn't it? The capital isn't populated by monsters. It's populated by people who have normalized the unthinkable. The Aztec flower wars remind us that humans are capable of constructing elaborate systems that justify mass violence, wrapping it in religion, in duty, in tradition, in spectacle, until the people inside the system can't even see it for what it is anymore. And that's not ancient history, that's a warning. So the next time you watch the Hunger Games and think, no society would ever actually do this, just remember that the Aztec Empire was doing something arguably more extreme, more organized, and more effective for over a century. Reality is, and always has been, stranger and darker than fiction. If this video blew your mind or made you see the Aztecs in a completely new light, smash that like button. It really does help the channel more than you know. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we go deep on stories like this every single week, the kind of history they definitely did not teach you in school. And drop a comment below telling me what you think. Was the Aztec system worse than Panem? Is there another real-life civilization that reminds you of a fictional dystopia? I want to hear your wildest takes. I'll see you in the next one.